Good morning on this beautiful first day of spring morning here in Hingham. I hope it's beautiful wherever you may be. Good morning and welcome to worship from our Old Ship Meeting House. We begin, as we always do, with a chime and then with the prelude from Christopher. Canoeing is the title. That's a spring-like, summer-like title by Amy Marcy Beach. We begin. Christopher. We gather, and it is indeed spring. We gather. May we be awake to the gifts of the season, the gifts of beauty, the gifts of one another. Awake to beauty, awake to one another, awake to love. We gather, it is spring, and it is good so to gather. Rich Jensen will sing our introit, Spirit of truth, of life, of power.
Spirit of truth, of life and power, we bring ourselves as gifts to thee. Oh, bind our hearts this sacred hour in faith and hope and charity. Oh, blind our hearts in charity.
Beautiful, Rich. Thank you. Our chalice lighting words will be from Joan Wilson. Joan, thanks so much.
Good morning. On this first Sunday of spring, I would like to light the chalice with words from Robert Louis Stevenson. Don't judge each day by the harvest you reap, but by the seeds that you plant.
Beautiful. Thank you. In that spirit, I light the flaming chalice of our faith, right next to the Forsythia, for which we can be grateful. We can be grateful for the Forsythia from Joan Wilson and Dennis. Thank you. I light our chalice. Now we sing. I'll be talking about the transcendentalists later on, and so this hymn with words from Ralph Waldo Emerson. It's number 44 in our hardback hymn books. If you have a hymn book, we sing of golden mornings. We sing of golden mornings. Well, good morning again and welcome again. Welcome to everyone who we see on our screens, names and/or pictures. It's great to see you all, to know we're all together, though at varying distances. We are together this morning, here and now. Welcome to newcomers, especially if you are new and would like to learn more about us, go to our website, oldshipchurch.org. We also, of course, are pleased to have old timers, people who've been here for months, years, or decades. Our fellowship hour immediately follows the order of our worship service on the same Zoom link. You can just stick around. And this morning, our fellowship hour, since this is our stewardship pledge time, we're not going to be asking for pledges during fellowship hour. We will be asking some questions in some small rooms, breakout rooms, some questions about this year and Old Ship. What have you missed this year during the pandemic and our virtual times, our isolated for many of us times? And how has Old Ship helped you cope during these times? And what from this year might we want to take forward, might you want to take forward for Old Ship during time to come as we emerge from the pandemic? So those will be a few questions to begin a conversation during our fellowship hour this morning. I hope you'll all, as many as you can, will stay. We come to our time for all ages, and Chloe Bride, our interim director of religious education, will offer the time for all ages. Chloe.
Good morning, everyone. So nice to see you all on this beautiful, beautiful day here in Boston, 60 degrees. So many of you have heard of Louisa May Alcott. She wrote the famous book, Little Women, and you may have even seen one of the seven movie versions of her story, Little Women. Now, Little Women was first published in 1868, which was over 150 years ago. Louisa May came from a really interesting family. The Alcotts were friends with many famous Unitarian ministers and transcendentalists, like the people Ken is going to talk about in his sermon today. Her dad was a school teacher, and her mom was one of the first paid social workers in the country. And we're going to talk a little bit about her dad today, Bronson Alcott. So you see, Bronson went to school as a child. His schooling looked a little bit different than the schools we see today. So his school probably looked maybe something like this. They were usually a one-room schoolhouse, so it might have been like a building, a one-room building in a field like this one, or it might have even looked like this. And this means that the building had just one room. They were really small buildings, and the inside might have even looked something like this, with just that one room there. There weren't a lot of bright colors like we're used to seeing in schools today. And the building also didn't have very good ventilation, means there wasn't air flowing in and out of it really well. Now, in the winter, it would get pretty cold, especially where Mr. Alcott was from in Connecticut. The students and the teachers would huddle together around the fire to keep warm. Because they were kept warm by a wood stove or a fireplace like you see here, it was often smoky inside the room. So imagine trying to learn and smelling smoke and coughing and it being really cold the whole time. And then you would think it would get better, but it didn't really. In the summer, it would get really, really hot inside. And because people didn't shower that much in the 1800s, it was also a little smelly. The purpose of school was similar to now, to learn. But it was about learning, memorizing them really well. You didn't need to understand what you learned or think deeply about it. You just needed to know the facts. In those days, it was also okay for teachers to hit kids if they were bad, something that's not allowed in schools today. Mr. Alcott, as he got older, didn't believe that schools should be like that. He didn't like sitting in a hot, smoky, smelly room just learning the facts. He wanted school to be a little different. He believed that there should be a library in the school with over 100 books. So you can see a little library in a one-room schoolhouse here. He believed that schoolrooms should be pretty and decorated with flowers and pine branches. He thought students should have their own desks and be less crowded and even maybe have like a slate, which is like a mini chalkboard to write on. So not be crowded in together, but to have space in their own desks. He thought education should be practical and hands-on. He thought you could learn about geography not by memorizing a map, but by making your own maps, say of the schoolyard or the town, like this one. He even encouraged hands-on education for subjects like math. Instead of just writing math on a board, maybe instead you could play with beans or rocks or other things in order to learn. He even believed in the most important thing of all, recess. And he also didn't believe in punishing kids by hitting them. So we know that Mr. Alcott was a man ahead of his time. A day at Mr. Alcott's school might look something like this. It would start with recess or playtime at 8 a.m. in the schoolyard. Then at 9 a.m., he'd have a story time about morals and virtues with a discussion. So they might tell a story like we did today in my little kids class, and then ask questions about it and talk about what the kids might think. And then at 10, they do school exercises like spelling, reading, math, definitions, and drawing. Everything was a discussion and it was meant to be interesting. Then they might have a lunch break and then they do more of the school exercises. And so I think maybe Mr. Alcott's school sounds a lot more familiar like our school today. That's what I would guess, is that Mr. Alcott's school has sort of become today's school. Although Mr. Alcott was often poor because people were scared of his new ideas and he would jump from job to job where he could get them, he helped make school a better place for all students he encountered. And many of his ideas proved to be right. So I hope you all enjoyed learning about Mr. Bronson Alcott today and his cool ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Chloe. One of my favorite anecdotes about Bronson Alcott, and I just came across this. He was apparently a wonderful talker and conversationalist, but his writing was really hard to understand. He'd write in circles. And so he, at least on one occasion anyway, he would send a manuscript to Emerson. Emerson would shape it up, make it more understandable. Then we'll go back to Alcott and he would work on it again and make it just as difficult to understand as before. So I guess you had to be there and many were, to get the many gifts of Bronson Alcott. Thanks so much, Chloe, again. We come to our candles of joy, sorrow, and concern. Several of you have sent me some joys, sorrows, and concerns you'd like me to share. I'm going to begin with one that I expect we all share. I will light a candle for those murdered in Atlanta this week and for all their families in their grief. And the candle burns for Asian Americans across our country who are walking and living in fear too much of the time. This candle to stop the hate and to bring love. Other candles that have been shared with me. Judy Flaherty asked for a candle of love and support for Rob Gregson. Many of you remember one of our former Old Ship intern ministers. Rob has been suffering from the effects of COVID for most of the past year. We wish him healing and health. Karen Schneider asked for this, a candle of joy, she writes, for my sister Judy Schneider on her long delayed visit with me, meaning Karen, and their mother. And Dennis Hogan and Joan Wilson, they write, we would appreciate healing thoughts for Joan this week as she undergoes surgery on Tuesday. We'll be thinking of you and sending those healing thoughts on Tuesday and beyond, Joan. And this from Mary Thomas. I'll read what she shared with me. A candle for my vaccination, which released my 2-year interiorized painful decision of selling my house, stemming from my need for income, she writes. Built as a chicken barn by its former owner, my husband Hal and I envisioned its transformation into a family home to be crafted by Hal. Reflecting our love for early colonial, Shaker, and Japanese architectural traditions, the house was designed by architect Dean Coolidge of Bulfinch, Richardson, and Coolidge in Boston. Our son, she writes, Lauren, grew up with a lot of construction around him, which inspired him for his life work as a designer. As Hal and I aged, we made plans to live in a continuing life care community eventually. So I am now, Mary tells us, to realize our plans without Hal at Linden Ponds here in Hingham and live an enriched community life with many old shippers. In humility, she concludes, at this time when many are experiencing pain and loss, I send prayers of well-being for all and can feel deep gratitude for the abundance at hand. We'll light a candle for you and for Hal, Mary, among our candles. And all the candles, too, will represent joys, sorrows, and concerns that some of you may have entered into our chat and may still enter into chat. And for those joys, sorrows, and concerns we hold in our hearts, though they've remained unexpressed among us. And we join our hearts and minds in the spirit of meditation, prayer, and then shared silence. With each breath, may we settle into a measure of more peace, more presence to ourselves, to our surroundings, to the moment. present to one another, wherever we may be, knowing we are very much together in spirit. With prayers arising from our hearts to the God of all hearts. Prayers, as always, for the health and well-being of one another, of our dear ones, of all beings. And this week, especially prayers from deep in our hearts for those victimized by the scourge of hate, especially holding in our minds and hearts those among us in our congregation and in our nation of Asian American heritage and background. We send our prayers to the families of the 8 who were killed in Atlanta this past week, prayers of comfort and healing. Along with prayers that we, each and all, will have the wisdom and courage to continue to raise our voices against hate and for love, and for appreciation of the beautiful diversity of our land and of our earth home. Appreciation for the gift that is this diversity, each with gifts to share and contribute. May our meditations and prayers continue in our time of shared silence. Our anthem this morning, sung by Chris Marr, is Lyndon Lee by Rafe Vaughan Williams.
Within the woodlands flowery gladed, by the oak tree's mossy moot, the shining grass blades timber shaded now do quiver underfoot, and birds do whistle overhead, and water's bubbling in its bed, and there for me the apple tree do lean down low in linden leaf. When leaves that lately were a-springing now do fade within the copse, and painted birds do hush their singing up upon the timber tops, and brown-leafed fruits are turning red in cloudless sunshine overhead. With fruit for me the apple tree do lean down low in linden leaf. Let other folk make money faster in the air of dark-roomed towns. I don't dread a peevish master, though no man may heed my frowns, I be free to go abroad, or take again my homeward road, to where for me the apple tree do lean down, low in lind and lea.
Well, thank you, Chris. We have two readings this morning. The first will be shared by Lorraine Varney Riggs. Thanks so much, Lorraine.
Our first reading consists of two brief selections, the first from Life Without and Life Within, and the second from Women in the 19th Century, both by Margaret Fuller. One sacrifice of the temporal for the eternal day is the grain of mustard seed, which may give birth to a tree large enough to make a home for the sweetest singing birds. One moment of deep truth in life of choosing not merely honesty but purity may leaven the whole mass. May truth unpolluted by prejudice, vanity, or selfishness be granted daily more and more as the due of inheritance and only valuable conquest for us all. Here ends the reading.
Thank you, Lorraine. Our second reading will be shared by David Nelson. Thank you, David.
Our reading this morning is from On the Duty of Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau. There are thousands who are in opinion opposed to slavery and to the war with Mexico, and who yet, in effect, do nothing to put an end to them, who, esteeming themselves children of Washington and Franklin, sit down with their hands in their pockets and say that they know not what to do and do nothing, who even postpone the question of freedom to the question of free trade. They hesitate and they regret, and sometimes they petition, but they do nothing in earnest and with effect. They will wait, well disposed for others to remedy the evil, that they may no longer have it to regret. There are 999 patrons of virtue to one virtuous man. Here ends the reading.
Thank you, David. Come to our time of offering. As each week, we have opportunities to give in a couple of different ways on our website. Of course, checks can always be mailed to the church. But on the website, the donate button will lead you to a pull-down menu. And two of the opportunities are to give to our ongoing Old Ship needs and budget, all of our ministries. And the other is to, will enable you to give to our current monthly outreach special offering, which this month is going to the Holly Hill Farm in Cohasset specifically for their programs that produce fresh and healthy food for local pantries. We are pleased this morning to have the educational director at Holly Hill, John Belber, with us to say a few words. So John, thanks for being here and thanks for all that you do.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you to others who have welcomed me in this morning. I'm gathering that you are hearing me as I speak, so I will continue. And thank you so much. And nice to follow up on songs and hymns such as Golden Morning on this first day of spring, and to hear the quote by Robert Louis Stevenson this morning. It is certainly a wonderful time for planting and growing. And I'm going to ask you today what our story will be on the farm as we get set to sow these seeds. On the farm, we work on some borrowed land, on some stolen land, on some land once occupied and used with respect by the Wampanoag indigenous people on Quonahasset, on the long rocky shore there. And on that land, we have dedicated some space to growing food, to planting, to cultivating, to tending, to weeding, to adding compost that we've made on site, to harvesting and washing and delivering produce to local food pantries. And we do this work, I do this work, fortunately, with teens and volunteers. Some of you perhaps listening today have come and participated, and we welcome you back at any time. We work year round. And right now, I bring with me here a small pod. It's not a screen share. It's a sharing something on the screen, a small pod of black beans. And in that pod, there are several 3 to 4 black bean seeds right there. What happens to those seeds? Can I plant them to grow into new black bean plants that will come to fruition later in the spring? Can I soak and roast and cook some of these black beans to nourish us? That is a good question for all of us. At the farm, we're working year round, and in this program particularly, to teach and work with teens and volunteers in this effort. So thank you for letting me be a part of this golden morning, as the hymn indicated, as we set out to continue to grow and sow seeds for good health and good food. Thanks very much for letting me join today.
Well, you're welcome, John, and thank you again for being here. We've all become so much more aware of the inequities when it comes to food and those who are living on the edge often. And it's wonderful to know that Holly Hill Farm, right down the street, next town over, is devoting a significant amount of energy and generosity to making sure that those who are in need have not just canned food, but healthy, fresh food in the pantry. So thank you again, and thanks to all of you who I know will be generous, as we have been in the past, to support this effort.
Thank you.
With that, our morning offering will be given and received, and we'll be listening to the French Suite, a portion of the French Suite number 1 by Bach, whose birthday is today, Johann Sebastian Bach, channeled by Christopher. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Christopher. And thank you, Johann Sebastian Bach. Are the transcendentalists still relevant? That's my topic today. Now, among the many copies at this point that I have of Henry David Thoreau's Walden and Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass are two paperbacks that show the wear of 50 years of reading and rereading. They're pretty much falling apart. Here's Leaves of Grass. Requires some tape here. They show the wear. Covers torn, corners of pages turned down, passages marked, and so on. At one time or another, you see, I carried these handy paperbacks in my back pocket of my pants, and it shows. On the other hand, the first copy of Emerson's essays that came into my hands as a gift from my parents is made of sterner hardback stuff, though in fact, so it's in better shape. Though in fact, I read from these pages over the years since then, and over the years since, read from these pages every bit as much as from the pages of Walden and Leaves of Grass. Clearly, these books were relevant to me then, all those years ago, just as clearly they were relevant to thousands of readers when they were first published. In what ways were they relevant, and are they relevant still? Well, here's a short answer. Each in their own way, these writers, these three, along with many others, we heard from Margaret Fuller earlier as well, all the 19th century, we know them as transcendentalists, were seeking to wake up to a fuller experience of life, the miracle of life, including waking up to what they sometimes call the higher law, conscience, as we might name it. And then they sought to live accordingly, and through their writings, lectures, and the examples that they set, they encouraged the rest of us in their day and all the readers since to do the same. Well, it sounds relevant to me, not only to their times, but to our time, to any time, really, right? I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, Thoreau famously wrote, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover I had not lived. Implicitly, of course, he was inviting us, his readers, to undertake the same experiment, not for all of us to go to the woods. That would be to take it a little too literally. Thoreau himself, after all, spent only 2 years in his cabin by the side of Walden Ponds, and during all that time, he, if not daily, pretty close to it, would stroll back into the village of Concord, have a meal with his family, and so on. But one way or another, whether in the classroom or the operating room, whether in the carpenter's shop or the kitchen, whether in the office or the pulpit, he was inviting us all to very much the same sort of quest, if you will. Then there was Walt Whitman, a little bit younger than Thoreau, and basically in New York rather than here in New England, but he was influenced by Emerson, Thoreau, and the rest. Walt Whitman inviting us to join him, not sitting by the side of a pond in the woods, but rather in traveling the open road, as he put it in one of his poems. Similar in spirit, though, it seems to me, as Thoreau. Whitman wrote, "Camarado, I give you my hand. I give you my love, more precious than money. I give you myself before preaching or law. Will you give me yourself? Will you come travel with me? Shall we stick by each other as long as we live?" Then we have Emerson, who invited us to trust ourselves, for, quote, "to believe your own thought, to believe that what is true for you in your private heart is true for all. That is genius," he said. Because, just paraphrasing only a little, when the oversoul, as he called it, when it breathes through our intellect, it is genius. When it breathes through our will, it is virtue. When it flows through our affections, it is love. Well, what's not to like in these sentiments? Or this thought from Margaret Fuller that we heard earlier, who was such a central figure in that circle of New England transcendentalists. We heard her words, may truth, unpolluted by prejudice, vanity, or selfishness, may truth be granted daily, more and more as the due of inheritance, that's D-U-E, of inheritance, and only valuable conquest for us all. Well, these are all bracing words from these several 19th century figures, but do they express the truth of our lives? Are they wishful thinking? And are they helpful? And if so, in what ways are they helpful? Well, to begin with, this idea of the higher law is implicit in greater or lesser degree in most of the passages I've just shared. And the assumption throughout the writings of the Transcendentalists is that each one of us has access to this higher law. It's an implanted wisdom within us. If we pay attention, if we seek to wake up to what it means to be alive, to what it means to be a human being with other human beings in community, and with all life, in community. You see, the Transcendentalists were not just these solitary, individualistic mystics, as they might sometimes be portrayed. No, they were in conversation, certainly with one another, whether individually together, in pairs together as they went for one of those long walks in the woods that they favored. They were with one another in community in circles of conversation, whether in Emerson's parlor or in Elizabeth Peabody's bookshop in Boston, or in the streets, walking in the streets of Manhattan with Walt Whitman, surrounded by people. And further, the higher law, conscience, if you will, called them into the wider world beyond their smaller circles. Whether it was Bronson Alcott, as we heard from Chloe this morning, opening his experimental school, or Margaret Fuller, who, among her many gifts to us across the generations, became the first female foreign correspondent for Horace Greeley's New York Tribune, or Unitarian minister and Transcendentalist Theodore Parker, who became involved in and passionate proponent of all the reform movements of the day, or pretty much all the Transcendentalists becoming ardent abolitionists, speaking out, writing, participating in abolitionist meetings and so on, and participating in civil disobedience, quite publicly breaking the fugitive slave law, agreeing with Thoreau, who wrote, under a government which imprisons any unjustly, the true place for a just man, just person, is also a prison. And not incidentally, as I've recently been learning from the quite recently published book, Fighting for the Higher Law, Black and White Transcendentalists Against Slavery by Peter Wierzbicki, many abolitionists, black and white, as the title affirms, were inspired by the higher law principles of the Transcendentalists. And the Transcendentalists were moved by their own principles to become those ardent abolitionists. For the point was that slavery was not just about physical injury to those who were enslaved, terrible as we know that was, but was also about moral injury to the enslaved, moral injury to all those who were complicit in the industrial cotton economy. And that included, we must say, many in the New England Unitarian churches of the time. So, all this relevant then? Well, surely. Relevant now? Just as surely, is it not? For how shall we live? How shall we live? A preeminently transcendentalist question is ever a relevant question, and the moral dimension of this question never changes. How could it? For the essence of the moral universe never changes. Circumstances, historically and culturally and so on, change, but the moral universe itself never changes. Moral universe that calls us to awaken to life, to awaken to the higher law and to heed that higher law. Neither, of course, does the spiritual dimension of our lives change. When I first read Emerson, Thoreau, and Whitman all those years ago, it wasn't so much the higher law, the moral dimension that first grabbed my attention. No, it was what we might call the spiritual or mystical dimension of their writings, manifest in the exuberant attention the transcendentalists all paid to the mystery and miracle of simply being alive. It's when you stop and pay attention, it's pretty strange, actually. And to notice that we are part and parcel of everything, of God, as Emerson put it. Indeed, their invitation to wake up to who we really are, because only that day dawns to which we are fully awake, as Thoreau put it, was life-changing for me, that invitation, as it was and is for uncounted others over the decades. Simply reading Whitman's frequent invitation to me, to us, to be amazed by the apparently simplest things was transformative. Listen, he wrote, "To walk up my stoop is unaccountable. I pause to consider if it really be. That I eat and drink is spectacle enough for the great authors and schools. A morning glory at my window satisfies me more than the metaphysicians of books." This is, after all, where we begin, isn't it? With waking up to the mystery and miracle of life. This never gets old. This is enduringly relevant because we so often go back to sleep to one degree or another. Waking up is enduringly relevant. That's where we start, even though, as I've been saying this morning, it's not where we end, since the mystical, spiritual are intimately related with the moral, indeed the political. You can't, after all, be selectively awake. The transcendentalists most assuredly knew this. For once we're awake to the miracle of our own life, we're awake not only to our own sufferings, as they may come, as they do come, but to the sufferings of our neighbor, our neighbors. So we're awake, in short, to the call of conscience, the higher law, implanted in our hearts and souls, as the transcendentalists affirmed, as I would affirm. So awake in these ways to life itself and to the higher law, can we, as Thoreau asked, merely hold our opinions about injustice of whatever sort and do nothing, say nothing, fail to speak out, speak up? If that's not a question relevant to our time or any time, then I'm not sure what would be. And just a slight, but I think important tangent as I draw to a conclusion, our Unitarian Universalist principles and the sources of our living tradition are really sort of transcendentalist document. The more conservative Unitarian churches and ministers of the transcendentalist time, they weren't having much of this, but we've caught up. Our principles and sources of our living tradition are a transcendentalist document, inviting us, as they do, to draw on whatever source of truth or inspiration, transcendent mystery and wonder, prophetic voices, all the religious traditions, and so on, in order to wake up to the miracle of life and seek to be among those who make more justice in this world, this interdependent web of life of which we are a part. And it is, after all, never irrelevant and never too late to wake up a bit more to life, and then to wake up to the ways in which we're called to serve life in the spirit of love as best we can, each of us uniquely. It is what the transcendentalists strive to do. It is what we all, I know, do strive to do, each of us in our unique ways, with our unique gifts, as well as with one another in community. With faith, since each of us is only one, and imperfectly and falteringly one at that, with faith that it all adds up. Because it does. Because it does. Yes, never too late to wake up a bit more and a bit more. So may it be. Blessed be. Amen. I will extinguish the flames of our joys, sorrows, and concerns, but not the spirit of love with which they were kindled. I will extinguish the flame of the chalice of our faith, but not the faith, not the love that we bring to our faith and to one another. These all go with us as we go forth. We will sing again. Number 163 in your hymn book, or perhaps some of you have downloaded it, For the Earth Forever Turning. Grateful for the blessings of our lives. May we turn and make of our lives, each and all of us, a blessing to all life, a blessing, many blessings of kindness, of compassion, and love. We each have something to give to life. May it be so always. Blessed be. Amen. May we go in peace. May peace attend all our days.